Moog synthesizer, there's the man who invented it, Robert Moog. Look at him. He certainly has invented something wonderful, hasn't he? Well, either that or been dabbling with some of those drugs they had around 50 years ago. Or maybe he stuck his finger in the plug by mistake and somebody switched on. I don't know, but there he is, and that's his kit. And there's an office block's worth of electronics in there. All this music, rather, started 100 years ago when they first started sending radio transmissions around the place. Marconi was doing his discoveries across the Atlantic, and there was a lot of noise. Have you ever tried to tune a radio? Tune a radio, it makes funny noise. Like an alien trying to communicate with you. That's what it was like all the way through, right from the early days. To begin with, of course, there was a team, and the guys on one side of the team were saying, let's get rid of that noise, we want to hear the signal. And the guys on the other side were saying, no, actually that noise is quite interesting. I wonder if we could harness that noise in some strange way and make musical notes from it. Do you think? And for 50 years they struggled and struggled, these geeks. And for 50 years they failed. But then the revolution started. In 1972, the most horrendous noise broke upon the scene, and I had to endure 5 weeks of it. It was top of the charts, and it was called Telstar. Hideous noise, isn't it? I mean, it's like somebody trying to drill through your teeth with a blunt drill. In 1973, they had another hit at it, and it worked a little bit better. We know this one because we now hear Doctor Who all the time. That's the sound you're going to make later on. Now, in order to make a sound like that, you need to know something about electronics, of course, but also something about sound. So I'm going to make some sound here. I'm actually going to produce here one of the earliest sounds ever to be made by an animal on the planet. The fart. Think about it, think about it. Pen. I'm going to cut it at the lowest point, there, and there. So that's not all the way around, I've got a flap. Looks a bit like an arrow, but I hope it sounds like a fart. Let's see. I'm going to suck at it. Now, there is a technical point here, there's an educational point I wish to put across, and that is that when this thing makes the noise, it's vibrating very fast. But if you put your hand on your larynx there and make a note, make a noise, you can feel it vibrating, but we've got to turn that clacking sound into music, into electronic music. And to do that, I'm going to have to hand over, and in fact exchange, machinery with Jonathan Hare. Here we go.
So we are going to give you a small wooden box. In the wooden box is some electronics and a loudspeaker. You connect up a battery to this, but two of the key components which are going to make you play a musical note are missing. A thing called a resistor and a capacitor. And we can wire up our homemade resistor and capacitor on these wires. So I need to tell you about resistors and capacitors. Have you heard about resistors and capacitors? No. Doesn't matter if you haven't. This is a capacitor. So it's a little device with two wires on it. A capacitor stores electricity. So it sounds a bit like a battery. I'll show you the battery here. But it's different. Battery creates electricity. So the chemistry going on in the battery makes the electrodes plus and minus. And you can create electricity with a battery. A capacitor just stores electricity. So it's a bit like a bucket. You can get an empty bucket and you can fill it up with water. With a capacitor, you can take a capacitor and you can fill it up with electricity, charge it up with electricity. But if I get the battery and I wire up the capacitor to the battery, as I connect that up, electricity will flow into the capacitor and it will charge the capacitor up. So that's now full of electricity. If I wire this up to the light, what's going to happen? Any ideas? It's going to blow up? Yeah. No, it's going to blow up. Okay, watch. It's only a little bucket, only a little capacitor, so it only can charge up a little bit. If I get a bigger one and I wire that up to the battery, now electricity is going to flow into the bigger capacitor, and that's charged it up. So what's the difference with the bigger one, do you think? It's going brighter and longer. Let's see. So it does last longer. So the way they make the capacitors, which is very clever, is they make them long and thin. So you have a piece of metal, on the other side you have an insulator, on the other side you have another piece of metal, and you roll them up. So basically you can have a very big capacitor, very big surface area capacitor, and if you roll them up, you can get that big area in a small volume. So this is like forming a very simple capacitor almost.
This is the kind of kit that Coulomb was playing with. Although he used gold leaf, you can do the same thing with 2 bits of sellotape. And there you see they're repelling. Yeah, it was astonishing in its day. They said, what is the magical force which is forcing them apart? And they had bad hair days, of course, in those, just like yours. And when you comb your hair, sometimes all the hairs are separated by the same force. That's what a bad hair day is, actually a scientific experiment. You never thought that before, did you? You just thought it was a nuisance. Well, sometimes if you can exploit the nuisances, you can do interesting things like create a mood synthesizer just by combing your hair. That was an extension too far, wasn't it then? A hair extension.
Okay. Okay, so this is Mr. Coulomb, over 200 years ago almost, and this is in the height of his studies. This is him in the lab. So the next 5 or 6 minutes, we just want you to have fun playing with capacitors. If I connect them up to the leads, we can make a simple capacitor. If you touch the capacitor, you'll discharge it and the note will stop. So use the plastic of the connections, and as you bring these together, what will happen as you bring these plates together, you'll increase the capacitance, and so make it slower. And so actually, as you bring these together, the notes should go yoo. And in fact, we found that if you get them close enough, you can actually get them so instead of a note, it's almost ticking. It's so slow. If you just touch one of them, you become part of the capacitor. So actually by touching it, you'll hear the note drop as well, because you'll become part of the electronic circuit. If you touch both of them, you'll stop. So you can play tunes by touching it, starting and stopping it.
Okay, if you put them like this, this cardboard actually acts as an insulator between the two. So what you've got is a very, very low note. Listen carefully. I don't know if you can get the camera really close so you can hear this. If I push on it and go right down. Listen to that. Now, what can you hear there?
There's like it's waving.
It's those clicks which, when you take them apart, they get faster and faster.
And then we can't hear them.
And then they turn into a note. Exactly the same. Those clicks are the same, but now you hear them as notes rather than clicks. Isn't that exciting?
Resistors are all about the opposite, really. They're all about wasting energy rather than storing it, but in controlled ways. I mean, sometimes in science or in the world, it's okay to waste a tiny bit of energy. Like, for example, in your shoes, you've got a grip on your shoes. If you didn't have grip on your shoes, you just fall over all the time, like walking on ice. So it's good to have grip on your shoes, but it means when you walk, you waste a little bit of energy with the grip, but it gives you control. And in a similar way with electronics, the equivalent is resistors. If you look on the board here, these are resistors. Inside these little components is a very thin little wire spiralling round. And when a current goes through it, it heats up the wire a little bit and wastes a bit of electricity. But it's quite handy because it means you can control things. For example, if you've got a 3-volt bulb and you put the 3-volt bulb on a 9-volt battery, it will get very bright and burn out. But if you have a little resistor in the circuit, what happens is the resistor just restricts the flow of the electricity, resists the flow, and just drops the voltage down a little bit so that you can run your 3-volt bulb on a 9-volt battery. So in other words, you can control the flow of electricity using resistors. And so therefore we can control the electronics in our instrument and so play a musical instrument much better with using a resistor. Let me show you what I mean. So I've got here a bulb. If I connect it across the battery, the bulb will light, as you've seen before. But if I now connect in a resistor, we'll be able to control the flow of the electricity much better. So I've got here a resistor, and I can pick off different resistances using this. And I connect this up, and you can see that the LED lights. If I put in some of the resistance into the circuit, you see that the LED is less bright, so we can control the brightness of the LEDs by putting in a resistor.
Okay, but there's something missing here. What we had before was clacking. We had vibrations, click, 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 click,
Yep.
click. How can that, which is a smooth action, can make clicking.
Yep, so we're using our capacitor. When it charges up to a certain value, it produces a click in the loudspeaker. If we now charge it up with a resistor in line, we can change the time it takes to charge up, and so change the rate at which it's charging, and so change the note that's produced. And rather than having hundreds of different capacitors for hundreds of different notes, we can now have a resistance and pick off different resistances to get the different notes, if you see what I mean. So basically you can use the resistor to control the rate at which the capacitor charges up. A bit like you can, you can show this with the water.
Have you ever come across the notion that electricity is rather like water? Water flows around the pipes, electricity flows around the wires with a current. They both have a current. This is my water supply. I've got pressure down there, which is my voltage. I've got a resistor here, so there's no electricity flowing. I've got to lower the resistance a little bit and something will flow through there. If you could hold the other side of that. We're going to fill up my capacitor until it's reached capacity. And when it's done that, interesting things may happen. It tips out. And every time it tips out, it's like every time a piece of paper flaps against the end of your tube, you get a little sound. So up it goes, and it's of quite a low frequency here. It's 1 every 10 seconds. So
A bit like a dinosaur fart.
Dinosaur fart. Very, very subwoofer. I've got to try and get a higher note. That means I've got to fill my bucket a bit faster. I've got to have less resistance here. I've got a certain amount of resistance. That's the flow I've got. Oh, that's good, isn't it? Back. Back. There we go. That's what it is normally. If I reduce my resistance, I should get a higher note. Shall we see? That was indeed a higher note, wasn't it? That worked then. Good. Thank you very much, Jonathan. A big round of applause, I think.
We're going to use resistors to control our note rather than the capacitor. And now what I'm going to give you is on this bit of wood, you can just about see there's a very thin bit of wire. This is our resistance wire.